All right, let's get started. So, again, everyone, thank you so much for joining us today and hoping you will really enjoy this informative session on the day in the life of series for the product manager role, particularly. And today we have CMU alumni Udit Bhatia as a product manager specialist. So, he has been working in this field for a couple of years, and I'm pretty sure that all of you will gain the insights and knowledge about how you can evolve in this career. So, without further ado, let's get started. So, Udit, can you please feel free to introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, I'm a CMU Tepper graduate of the class of 2020. This is my fourth year as a PM, roughly, across different experiences that I've had, and I'm currently working at Google, specifically at Google Cloud, working on the network security areas. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the session and hopefully more towards the questions at the end. Uh, Hopefully, I can answer all of them as much as I can.
Sure. So, can you describe what your 4 year journey of as a product manager has been so far and what your experience looks like?
Sure. So I think my slides are visible, right? So
Yeah.
um, yeah. So I started off with an undergrad in computer science, and then that was my foray into networking as a discipline within computer science. Um Joined Cisco as an engineer, where I was uh, probably doing some product management task as well, which was around um, working with customers, working with sales to build deals and build designs for networks. So that was my entry into the networking world with Cisco. Not sure of how many people on the call are aware of the networking industry as a whole. Cisco is a leading vendor who has provided networking equipment slash solutions for anything and everything that powers the internet today. So even in the CMU campus, a lot of protocols, a lot of technology is enabled by Cisco's patents. Um, in 18, I made the choice on on having a very fruitful conversation with the product manager, incidentally at Cisco, to understand how to get into the role. Um, and it was, there was a couple of paths given out, and MBA seemed to be the fastest one. Started my MBA in 2018. Did an internship in the middle at Fiserv. It's a financial services firm based out of Atlanta. Um, at Fiserv, it was mostly a summer internship where I was given this massive task of cutting down products instead of building products. So started on the reverse end of product management. Uh, Imagine uh, having conversations with existing product managers on how to kill their product. That's a fun summer, essentially. Um, After that, during the pandemic, I guess I joined back Cisco. There was a wonderful opportunity waiting for me. It was in the enterprise section. So I'm not sure if people know what a networking switch essentially is. It's a hardware product. So as a product manager, I was managing, owning the hardware slash software end of the product, which was sold across the world, across all geos. As a PM, I was owning all of that. Um, and I think the flavors during that time, especially now, essentially is getting the product out with all the supply chain issues, designing chips, making sure the next 5 years worth of roadmap is planned and ready to go, because hardware life cycles are pretty slow. And in 22, actually at the start of the year, I made the choice to jump uh, to Google Cloud. Uh, it was a pretty easy decision because a lot of my team already had jumped, so there was a lot of call coming in, and yeah, at some point on an unconscious level, you can't say no to Google as well, which I believe a lot of people on the call share that sentiment. At Google Cloud, I am working in the networking division, so Um, the way I think a very superficial way of distributing any cloud company would be there are three aspects: compute, storage, and networking. So I work on the networking side in a portfolio of network security. I have no background in network security, so it was fun. It's been a good scale up, and as a PM over here, I'm handling a SaaS product, um, and it's the responsibilities are almost very similar to what I had previously.
Wow, that's really a brilliant journey, especially when it comes to the diverse experience which you have. Really exciting.
Yeah,
So, maybe since you're now working at Google, you're working at Google within the Google Cloud department, can you share what a typical day looks like for you as a product manager there?
sure. So I guess the basic fundamental questions about the product, essentially, what I tried to answer over here were around what do I do, which I already answered. The customer base is mostly for cloud is enterprise B2B. The scope is again worldwide because you are the single person responsible for the product, and there are times that you get reached out by people across from the other end as well, and you have to manage those communications. The product that I work on is a SaaS product, pay as you go, essentially allows customers to move traffic from their data centers to the cloud, having those conversations with third-party services, which might be hosted on a on Azure or an AWS. But the main word over there is securely. So that's where the network security aspect. Um, Currently, um, the gambit of work that I'm working on essentially is just managing and executing the roadmap. So there's a lot of growth happening within cloud, and there's a lot of stuff, a lot of white space still pending, and that's why there's a push from all the three vendors, I guess, to execute as much as possible on delivering new features that enable a frictionless experience for customers. Second aspect is much more from the business side of things, which is managing the P&L revenue targets for the product. So you know every product has this, and you as a PM are responsible to answer and defend a lot of the hypothesis around the revenue that you want to achieve and what you achieve essentially. um, in terms of time, this is what I've done is not every day is similar, but what I've done is like taken a week and just condensed it together, averaged out the numbers. So uh, I think a lot of key themes essentially for the day essentially are: one is your own work, building product requirement decks, pricing decks, which is essentially your work that you have to present later on. That I termed as focus work because in Google somehow it's a very keywordy thing at Google. Um, the second biggest bucket is calls with sales and or slash customers essentially. Since they are the ones who are selling a product, they are in touch with the customer day in day out, and the customers are essentially your users. So in B2B, sales becomes a bigger component versus B2C, where B2C essentially you will have feedback coming in the thousands, and you sort of average it out. But in B2B, you do tend to have bigger customers that you talk to more, who are much more excited, and then you can use those logos essentially to drive a lot of your roadmap. So those calls are very important when you're building out a product. Uh, the third biggest bucket is engineering calls. So I'm sort of clubbing all the stand-ups, all the design calls, all the uh, how basically we're answering the question that how can we build this, and by when we can build this. So those are the two main questions, and third one is what do we need to build this, and that basically all those decisions basically flow out into different key areas with respect to, for example, if we're talking about what do we need to build this, then that means resources, how much headcount for engineering do we need, how much support from other teams that we need essentially. Um, the fourth and the fifth bucket are the smallest ones usually. Uh, in in the cloud, a big theme essentially is a lot of products they work together as a solution. So um, you have to sort of cross collaborate with other products that might need your product for some feature enablement. So those are those calls. You work with the PM on the other side, see where the opportunity is, see how the roadmap can be managed to execute and deliver the sub feature. And the last one essentially is your one-on-one with your mentor, your manager, or your skip level essentially. And those are really important for visibility. Those, I mean, you can do all the work, but at some point you'll have to talk to and understand the vision that's coming in from the top, and make sure that you're aligned with it. And also, these calls help you, um, by you can surface problems that you might be having, or raise questions, or just if you're lost somewhere, you can ask for help. uh, on the left hand side, what I mentioned essentially is that these days are very customizable. These categories can go up and down in terms of priority. So for example, if this week is more of uh, customer summit, then a lot of the buckets will be filled with customer calls and just doing demos. Um, Second part is requires very heavy prioritization. I find myself on a Sunday, usually during the evening, just planning my whole week, accepting and declining calls. Because if you start accepting every call, then you will not be able to do your own job. And at some point, the roost, the hens will come back to roost. I think that's I forgot the idiom essentially, but uh, at some point, people will start looking at you as a bottleneck. So it is very important to find that sweet spot for yourself in the day where you are the most productive and finish off your tasks. And that's where the prioritization works. So a PM not only prioritizes the product, the roadmap, but also his own life, his or her own life essentially, around the product. So that's what it looks like.
Wow, that was so detailed. I really like how you blend different experiences and work areas all into this categorical visual. So now I see where this, or rather, what this Google Cloud Product Manager would probably be doing, like maybe, driving product strategy and creatively working with engineers, product designers, and building those business relations. I really like it.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. So what do you think does the career evolution or growth look like when it comes to a product manager's life?
Sure. So typically, so this is the Google hierarchy. You can find resources online, which is somewhere around PM ladders. If you search PM ladders, you can find how different companies structure them. Usually, if you people coming in from undergrad, they usually join it as APM. People coming in from masters, they'll usually join as product managers directly. And the theme essentially is the higher you move, the more broader your responsibilities become. So managing a product essentially becomes managing a portfolio. Uh, a roadmap execution for a product essentially becomes setting the vision and the strategy for the entire portfolio, or even the industry essentially. And one thing that doesn't change is talking to customers. You might be talking, essentially what is the difference essentially is a product manager uh, might be just talking about a product, their own product to the customer specifically, but a person who's in a director role or a VP role might be talking about the entire portfolio. So as a solution, you're sort of looking at that. Uh, and it doesn't really change. I'm trying to find any differentiation from B2B or B2C, like for example, a YouTube PM, but it doesn't really change over there, because at some point, the higher you go, the conversations become much more broader. Uh, it can be a PM can be YouTube music, and then at the top you can be the only person in charge for music, YouTube play, shorts, whatever that comes out, all these products together. Um, yeah, so the responsibilities become broader, and you're meant to be sort of subject matter expert, at least uh, on key areas that you want to support. um, yeah.
Wow. So I can see how the execution cycle might be going on. It's not just limited to probably product management, but also analyzing, positioning, and promoting your product within the market. And I think a lot of collaboration would be going on within the different groups of Google, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm guessing you might be collaborating with, say, Google Workspace or other teams
Yeah.
within. the
Yeah. So
organization.
a quick themes, if you're sort of familiar with the cloud industry, is that every player essentially has these two components. At least the major three have this. So you'll have the workspaces, which is your docs, spreadsheets, and everything combined with the cloud, so that you're providing this one whole solution to the company who's going native into the cloud. Microsoft has their own Office 365. Google has the workspace. Not really sure about Amazon. I think they do a third party thing, but yeah, those are like the two biggest buckets in any cloud player. And those are the essential services to provide.
All right. Thank you for sharing this interesting feedback on different organizations. So, what do you think as a product manager should one really invest his or her time in? What do you think are the key skills to evolve and grow?
Yeah, so I think everyone knows the theme. There's a slide essentially for this that I've built. Uh, I mean, I've taken something that's usually not found in books. Usually, a lot of people give a cookie cut answer that's there. Uh, I think number one, the amount of skills that you want to look at is, first one is prioritization. You'll have to be very, very conscious about where you are spending your time on. I think that as an MBA student, I was able to see that. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure every other master students will have to do that again. So your calendar runs your life. Um, the second one is get comfortable with taking ownership, having the founder's mindset and not the CEO's mindset. CEO is basically works for the shareholders and does not own the entire business. Is not very much. I guess they're incentivized financially, but a founder essentially, they build the product from zero to one and then take it to from one to n essentially. So a PM, you have to kind of have that mindset that you might be losing a couple of dollars, but if it's not good for the users, or you're taking a shortcut, then it's hurting your product. It's hurting your baby that's coming into the world or probably growing up. So you have to look at every aspect that a CEO probably might not look at. Um, Communication is the third one, where you will. I would urge people to start presenting and be much more comfortable telling stories, especially with the data centric that world that we live in. Um, KPIs are your friends. Those are usually uh, cut through the fluff. Um, there are companies that do not make you revise all of your documents to remove every fluff that is there. Um, but if you have um clear cut KPIs that are measuring success slash failure, then you can get your point across very fast across the leadership. Uh, Fourth key skill, apart from having technical skills and business skills, is essentially negotiation. A PM is not a people's manager. He or she does not essentially have people reporting to him. He has no power over other people's timelines. You'll have to talk to the engineering manager to get resources allocated. You have to talk to sales essentially to make them push the product towards the customers. Um, so negotiation plays a heavy is a very very important skill in your armory essentially that you will have to use every day of your work. So yeah.
That's almost all about managerial skills, I would say. And definitely, like you mentioned, there
Yeah.
are technical skills. Probably, can you share some or throw some light on what kind of technical skills are required? Because everyone knows this is more of a managerial role.
Yeah. So that's the trick, right? So product management doesn't mean you're managing people, you're managing the product. So there's nobody's listening to you essentially at the end of the day. You can't force stuff on people unless they're buying into your vision of what you want to do in the market. And the technical side of things, right? So I would say, um, rather be if you're targeting a specific industry, then it helps. If you want to go deeper into the technical side of things, what it does, it makes it much more easier to have conversations with engineering on what vision that you want to sort of invest in. Uh, it also makes it easier for you to talk to customers. So if I'm talking to customer, I'm not talking to the CEO or the CFO or even a manager on the other side. I'm talking to the tech team over there. They will let me know what kind of things they're trying to do, what they're trying to implement. So it will help you a lot when you're sitting on those calls. And if the customer asks you some stuff about the product on the technical side of things, they won't ask you pricing. They won't ask you, hey, what the other guys are doing. They will ask you, how does your product work? So you have to be comfortable answering those kind of questions. It's not all uh, a very dark scenario where you're left alone with the customer. So if you're thinking that you don't have that much technical skills, you always usually have someone from the sales side who is an architect, or usually you have someone from the engineering who comes in with you to answer some of the questions that you might not be able to answer, right? But I would say to remain technically curious, I guess, about your product. So you should know the ins and out so that you can have better conversation with engineering and better calls with customers. Um, yeah, you should know what you're selling instead of
Got it.
just going to a call. So the depth
Yeah.
might not be the same uh, that a programmer or a engineering manager might have, but it's supposed to be there, close to that.
So, are there any specific courses, maybe online or within the grad programs, which you might recommend for the audience?
Uh, Courses. I think for people starting out, I guess the cookie cutter book essentially is the Lewis Lane book, which opens up. I think it's called Divide and Conquer. It opens you up into how things work at different companies and how a product manager should essentially work. Um, I found that book really interesting just for the basics 101. Uh, for people who haven't read the book or haven't seen the book, it basically gives you like initial tools on how to do preps for interviews essentially and how to organize your mind when it comes to understanding these problems. Uh, and then it's after that, it's all practice. It's all about training your mind. So, a basic question that PM interviews are generally very open and they tend to be around specific questions that everybody knows. What's your favorite product? How would you improve it? Those are like uh, every interview you go to, you'll probably get asked those questions. So it's helpful for you to train your mind when you're walking across campus. Just look at different things. Look at how they're built, what kind of improvements that you can make to them. So come an interview, you're sitting in an interview, and suddenly somebody says, "How can you improve say, a trash can?" Right? You can organize your brain to look at what what are you looking for, basically going forward. How can you improve it? What's the scope and what's the benefit essentially? You can't add a ML program to a trash can. Doesn't make sense. You'd probably end up spending money for a product that nobody will use. So there you can, if you're good on the technical side, then you have to understand the business side, right? You can build this, but is there a market for it? Is there any users for it? So the book will give you the framework, but do not, when you go on interviews, do not try to just copy paste the framework because everybody knows the framework. It's more about how you navigate and have that conversation.
Absolutely. You can't share or probably throw off your technical knowledge on that day, but yeah, it
Yeah.
will definitely be useful throughout your career, specifically if you are into a particular technical product.
Yeah, and all those
So,
interviews, like technically, it's fine. What they're looking for in terms of technical skills is basically how you have a conversation with engineering. Can you stick into that conversation? That's all. Nobody's
got
asking
it.
you to code. Probably algos, just to think how would you approach any problem. Um, but yeah, it's more about having conversations, sticking it out there with engineering, and making sense of what you're building.
Got it. So, with that, let's actually move on to the questions from audience. At this point of time, I already see a couple of questions in the chat. So, the first question is from Anushay. Can you touch more about your transition from an engineer to a product manager, and why did you choose to make the switch?
So,
Interesting.
yeah, so I was working on this project back in uh, back in 2016 somewhere, and because I was working with sales and I was from the engineering side, I did end up meeting PMs, and I just tried to understand what they were trying to do. And for me personally, I didn't envision going deeper into the technical side. I thought, uh, whatever level I am right now at, I'm comfortable with that. Probably won't go into a masters of technical something in the future. Uh, so I was always curious on the other side of the business, how to run the business, and I saw their work, did a shadow program with them to understand what they were doing, and that made me essentially buy into the whole PM uh, PM job role. At that point, I was given like two different paths on how to achieve it. One is uh, and this is like 2016, 17, so I'm not even sure those paths, or those are the only path essentially. So one was just do an MBA and get in through there, because usually these tech firms will have MBA PM programs. The second one essentially is spend your time in the company, do accept different roles, marketing, sales, um, um, and then try for the PM role. Once you've gotten all those different aspects of the business understood, uh, that probably was a 7 to 8 years journey versus a 2 year MBA. So yeah, it made it much more easier to make that choice.
Interesting. I see Prakriti has her hand raised. Please, can you go on with your question?
Thanks, Ashita. Hi, Udit. Thanks for doing the session. I'm a first year at Tepper. Not sure if you remember meeting me in the coffee chats.
Oh,
Yeah,
hey.
yeah. So here's my question. What are some of the biggest challenges that you have faced in your journey as a PM, whether at Google or before? And what are some of the best ways you've found to overcome them?
I think the number one challenge essentially for any PM whenever you change a job essentially also is just understanding the product and the business that you're in. Um, what I am afraid of essentially in any new role that I come up is this idea already been executed on, or has it already failed essentially. The best way to counteract all of that essentially is to just read up, right? There are a lot of documentations available publicly about your product. Internally, you will have access to all these decks about how the product did for the last 5 quarters, what
Mhm.
all issues that it ran into, because somebody was handling that product at the end of the day, right? That is when, if the product is already established or it's coming out essentially. If that's not the case, if it's a new product, then there'll be if there'll be questions around what's the business case for the product, because that's the first thing that gets built. Why do we need the product? Just try to make yourself familiarized with what, first of all, what you're selling. Number two, who's your customer? And number three, what's the target for your product? Like, where do you want to see it? What's the target in the first year? What's the target in the next 5 years? And I guess the fourth thing is, how does it play in the rest of the market? Because your manager will probably have like 5, 6 products underneath him,
Mhm.
or him or she essentially. Um, and you need to understand where does your how does it work across the whole portfolio. So once you spend like couple of months, 3 months, 4 months just reading up on all those stuff,
Mhm.
then you can start asking questions and ask as many questions as you want. Especially at Google, I think there's a term that is given to anybody who joins in at least for the whole year, is a noogler. uh, and there is absolutely no you're supposed to ask as many questions as you can, without the fear of feeling uh, feeling overburdened. I guess you are supposed to ask for help, and yeah, along with other things that the campus provides.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for that. I was actually a developer on Azure, so I think I relate to that part about
Yeah,
figuring out what things have already been tried and failed, so that you don't make those mistakes again.
yeah.
That's a good. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your question, Prakriti. We have next question from Ragashri. We hear product manager and technical product manager positioned as different roles. How similar or different are these? Interesting.
So I would say it depends upon the company, essentially, right? So what, from my experience, what I've seen is technical product managers will usually be much more ingrained towards engineering, of converting any customer need into an engineering language. So they'll have much more, I guess, their feet um, dipped into the engineering pool rather than the business pool. Uh, Companies which have these two roles will, the division, essentially differentiation, essentially falls in who handles the business and who handles the technical side. So it's there, and some companies will probably never have this. It's a scale, essentially. If you're looking at business plus technical, some companies will be right down in the middle. Google is in the middle, essentially. You are supposed to be on dipping your toes on both, on like on both sides. I guess TMT is the only position I've seen is in Amazon, where it's slightly more technical. From my conversations, I have never worked over there, so just an asterisk over there. You're much more facing towards the engineering side, basically converting customer feedback into engineering language. So making that conversation much more easier. Whereas in roles like, for example, at Google, you'll usually have an engineering lead who will, you can find consensus around, hey, are we doing the exact thing what the customers are looking for? So technical burden is probably shared.
Got it. Yeah. Thanks for simplifying the language, though it was confusing by the title, but the description made it really uh, digested easily, I would say. And now we have another thought-provoking question, probably. So, do a lot of PMs eventually become startup founders, inspired by your slide?
Which one was that? Oh, founder. Okay. Um, Depends upon your risk-taking appetite. If you see an opportunity or if you see a gap, essentially. So as a PM, you're looking at the industry a lot, where the gaps usually are, and um, I wouldn't say every PM becomes a founder, but sometimes it's just a group of people who have similar thoughts, a similar risk-taking appetite, and they want to jump off. Uh, I have read about a lot of people um, actually did back in, I think, 2019, did interview with a firm which was basically PMs, a couple of PMs at, um, I think it was one of the FANGs who decided to jump into a market that one of them, the FANGs, was providing. Um, Cockroach Labs is another example where engineers basically came out or out of Google, essentially, to build their own company. So yeah, I wouldn't agree with that statement. It's more about, as an engineer or as a PM or any role, essentially, if you're able to recognize the opportunity that exists in the market, and if you have the appetite to take on the risk to start building a startup, right? That's not an easy task.
Got it. So, the next question is from Eunice. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Uh, do you find that you are constantly learning all the time as a product manager? How much do you have to know to be on top of the latest technology or products? Very good
Uh,
question.
I would say I always leave 20% as unknown, as something probably I will never achieve. So I'm targeting for 80%. The reason I say 20%, which is unknown, is because there are customers, thousands of customers that will use your product in any way they see fit to fit it into their use cases. Um, and they might break something. They might end up doing something with your product that you might probably didn't even see happening. Uh, there are some hacks that they might do just to make it work for themselves. So I would say, as a PM, you can't really there's no bar essentially where you'll feel very comfortable or not comfortable. There are scenarios popping in and out essentially all across your life, uh, where something works for a customer, something breaks for another customer, right? And that's where the prioritization comes. So do you solve for this customer or do you solve for that customer? Because your resources are limited, right? So A, you don't get comfortable. Yes, the more calls you get, the more calls you attend with customers, where the expectation is you don't know what they're going to talk about, right? What situation they are in. Uh, it's more about, hey, I have this stack of decks with me, and this is what I'm going to talk about. But for the rest of it, you have to be much more confident about handling those kind of situations. So I think in TEPA they have this class called uh, acting for business, right? So that is very, very useful in those unfamiliar situations. How to project a good, that you're doing, your product is actually good and you're doing your best, and pacifying customers in very, very, I think, boiling situations. Uh, so it can go either way, right? So you don't get comfortable, you just get better at managing situations. And number two is there is no ceiling at which point you've read like 5 books, so now you're good with it, because part of PM essentially is the biggest part of PM essentially is problem solving, um, and you have to be better at that instead of solving for every question. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
In my mind, it did, but just want to double check with the person who asked the question.
Eunice, would you like to clarify or ask any follow-ups?
No, it's good. Thank you so much for answering my question so well.
Okay.
The class you mentioned, yeah, it was like a class I was also eyeing on and something
Yeah.
actually required for my curriculum. So yeah, thank you so much for answering my question.
By the way, may
I'll
I just add, acting for business has nothing to do with business. It just teaches you how to communicate better. And it's a fun class, super fun. 100% recommended.
Wow. Now listening to all of you, it makes me, though I'm pursuing masters in data analytics, but now I feel like, okay, I also need to enroll in some funny course like this.
Yeah.
But probably as a follow-up, we have another question from Dhanisha. How much would you say your college education helped compared to your real life experience for learning in order to become a good PM?
Oh man, that's a controversial question. I've 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 just finished my student loans, so probably can answer that question. I think there's good and bad part around it. So like the technical side, I think I was pretty good with it for networking because I had like 5 6 years of working in the industry, so I was pretty fine with the concept. So if somebody is a software programmer or an engineer servicing an industry, you probably know you don't need to go through a 101 course. On the business side, yes, there were some courses that I really liked. There were some courses that never added uh, to my skills essentially. Uh, I think for me it was pricing strategy, if I can recall it correctly. I think pricing. I forgot the professor's name. I think has changed a couple of times after that. Pricing strategy was there, which just opens your world into what's currently available, how you think through different aspects of pricing, learning the language of what is spoken at different companies when you present these things. Um, just understanding. There were like technical tech strategy by Professor Tim. I'm gonna probably murder his last name. It starts with D and it's a big name. So I think he was one of the judges for the TIC uh, case competition recently. Uh, but yeah, these type of courses were pretty useful. Understanding, to understand the language which PMs usually talk in. So pricing strategy, basic strategy like tech strategy, essentially how things have been done at different firms. And the last part essentially is the business game that happens usually for um, the MBAs. It usually is the second year, at the end of the second year. So Uh, you play a product officer, chief product officer in the game, and you make those decisions. So that game was very, very close to what I ended up doing at my real job. So um, for people who don't know, it's a fictional game that you play. You have a team of 5 people who take up different CXX roles. There's a guy who plays CEO, chief product officer, supply chain, operations, finance, uh, and you have a board, company board that's built up of alumni or ex professors from the school, uh, and they're all usually local, so they can come up and meet with you, and you are supposed to play this game with 5 other companies, which is basically 5 other teams within that cohort, and make decisions on a uh, on a platform essentially. And once you enter the decisions, the basically the algo back at the back end basically looks at the best company and basically allocates additional revenue. Like how did you do in this accelerated quarter or a year, and then basically the end goal is just dominating the market. So if you take up the chief marketing officer or chief product officer, then you end up doing a lot of roles, a lot of job that is essentially a PM's job, especially on the technical side. So on the business side, not the technical side. You're selling watches at the time I did the game, so there's not much technical over there.
Awesome. So definitely we can say that irrespective of the courses, education definitely helps us gain the experiential learning and make us ready for such job roles. So what we have question from Divya. What can engineers do better to make your life easier and for them to work well with you as a team? Wow. More from engineering side.
So I think it's I won't say engineering can make your life easier. I think it's more about a PM trying to understand what's possible what's possible in the realm of reality. What I do especially is try to bring my engineers onto customer calls so that they understand what's the real time business case, and so that for them it's not something of a line of code, it's actually something cohesive into a product, and they know what they're targeting towards and what customer pain points they're elevating. So from the engineering side, I think it's um I don't expect much apart from having expertise into their trade craft. I think the number one question that I really want is the confidence that it is technically possible, and the confidence on and when can we essentially deliver on it. So I think those are the basic requirements for any engineering goal, um, to understand the scope and what needs to be done. Um, but yeah, as a PM, I think it falls more on the responsibility of the product manager to make sure uh, you are able to show the vision of what you're building to your engineers. Otherwise, the cohesiveness will never come. The importance of building it will never come. So yeah.
Absolutely. So, as we already discussed among the skills, it's more about teamwork and negotiation or collaboration between engineers and product managers, right? So,
Yeah.
we have one last question from Ragashri. What are the input sources that empower PMs to drive the product vision and roadmap? And there's a second part to it because customer feedback and pain points are definitely great fuels, but what are the other sources you would rely on?
Yeah. So one thing that is probably, I think for B2C, it's much more easier because you are able to crowdsource a lot of opinions and feedback that's coming in. Um, the second biggest thing also is how uh, the data that you basically source from different customers who are using your product, uh, just to understand how they're using it and basically how it works. That's like a basically underlying data. The biggest chunk that is usually not visible for people, for any student that's coming into an org, essentially is research reports, industry trends. Um, every company participates in analyst research reports where they provide insight into their roadmap, what issues they are facing, um, and how they see the industry evolving, etc. So these are like companies like Gartner. They do like these industry research reports where they talk about where the industry is going forward and how different players are working towards it. And that report essentially every company has to buy in, because when you're pooling in all, every company is pooling into the resource, and then everybody is getting insights into what other players are doing and how they can basically change up their strategy, their positioning in the market, essentially. So uh, Gartner is one of the most famous names in those realms. There are others as well, like IDC, that provide similar research reports, and anyone basically running a business is participating on those. So when you enter the firm, any company, you will have access to those research reports where you can read up upon the industry and what's happening in the next 10 years, or where customers are trying to go to, because that one report is a coagulation sort of uh, between what industry players are trying to do and what the customers' demands are, what they feel is good and bad. So, um, yeah, I mean that's the fundamental source that you have to read upon, just to make sure that you're going in the right direction.
Absolutely. So I think as a one of the sources of fuels which we can probably conclude is definitely the market research and analysis.
Yeah.
Uh, I see Prakriti has raised her hand.
Hey,
Please
yeah,
go
so
ahead.
another question for Udit. So how do product managers recover from failed products? Because not everything a person works on can be successful. So how does it affect the person's career?
I wouldn't. So there's two aspects. One is how to recover from a product that is essentially failed. One is you do a due diligence on what happened, why it happened, what failed, and you make sure to document it and share that out.
Mhm.
Um, there is, I'm not talking about other companies, but at Google, it's a blameless culture. We
Mhm.
try to understand the post-mortem of the incident. And it's celebrated within the company to share and do a post-mortem and understand what really happened and why things failed, uh, just to make sure that everybody knows what not to do, essentially. And the second part of the career part of it, I haven't seen it basically affect people's career, uh, because you have to understand that it's not one person who's just turning on the knobs and making people do. It's a very consensus-based decision of doing and entering a market.
Mhm.
Uh, it might work, might not work, nobody knows. But there are a lot of safety checks, people who have vested interest up and down the chain. Like, for example, an engineering manager might even ask you, why do I need to do this? Right? So at every step, you will be forced to answer and defend your idea, and that usually takes away the bad ideas mostly, unless there's something that reaches at the top. But
Mhm.
I've never seen it. In my experience, I've never heard it affect careers essentially. So
Yeah, and I asked this because you talked about ownership. So ownership does put some
yeah,
sort of responsibility on a product manager. So
correct. It's the responsibility is to defend, right? If
mhm.
anybody pokes a hole into your idea, you have to defend, like why
Mhm.
it's still good.
Got it.
That was so optimistic. Thank you so much for conducting this informative and eventful session. I hope all of you really enjoyed, and thank you everyone for your time. Thank you, Udit, for being there with us and
Yeah,
sharing your experience.
yeah, happy to.
Thank you so much, all of you. Bye. Take care.
Good luck. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining.